I'm about to do like one last little tweet really quick. Don't tell me that. What is up, everybody, and welcome to our very first Poker News debate series. We decided to kick it off with, I would say, one of the most hotly debated subjects, really, since even I've been in the poker space, but specifically it's come up in the last few years and really in 2020 and 2021 for a couple of reasons. There was a little brief time where Phil Galfond post heads up match, Phil Hellmuth versus Antonio Esfandiari. Phil Galfond, who is obviously widely respected in the poker community, basically made the claim that Phil Hellmuth does not get enough credit and that he is actually a good player and had made quite a lot of plays that, even Phil Galfond had not expected. And this, of course, sparked a lot of debate within the industry. I just interviewed Daniel Negreanu a couple weeks ago, and as he heads tomorrow into his duel with Phil Hellmuth, he said basically that Phil has not taken the time to jump into understanding what a lot of the best guys, the best heads, the best names in poker right now are doing, and really hasn't studied in the way that would put him on the same level as a lot of these high stakes poker players currently. So this led me to want to debate publicly what's going on with Phil Hellmuth. The subject of our debate, the question is Phil Hellmuth only good against bad players? Which I think is what quite a lot of people have come to at this point. Obviously, he has a lot of results, and I'm going to introduce you guys to my colleagues who will be heading this debate. They've already done on PokerNews.com around maybe October of 2020. They did a written form of the debate, which I think obviously needed a video format. But my two colleagues are both very well versed in this subject. And I want to say before we present the debate to you, which I'll tell you exactly what the format's going to look like. But before we get to that, I want to say that both of these guys were given their position on the subject matter. It was their job to defend their position, but this is not their personal opinions. This is just in the, traditional debate structure. You're just given the position and you have to figure out how to formulate your argument. So neither of these guys, they may be on the side that they actually believe, but it's not their personal opinion. This is also not the personal opinion of Poker News. This is just a debate. So we decided to do the debate. I researched a lot of different ways, and I think some of them may or may not be more entertaining than others. I'm really open to your guys' opinions and thoughts on how this all goes and how you think we could make it better, more interesting, what you think the next debate should be, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And at the end, we're going to open it up to you guys to toss in your opinions, your thoughts, facts you think we might have missed. You can throw some questions at our debaters to really mix things up here. So the way that the structure of the debate is going to go, the pro side, so essentially the person arguing that Phil is only good against bad players, will open up first with a 3-minute opener, and he will be followed by the con side that Phil is good against all players, and he will have 3 minutes. We'll follow that up by a 3-minute rebuttal. The con side, again, will get a 3-minute rebuttal, and then we'll give a very short conclusion to the person who started it. And as I introduce my colleagues, the person on the pro side, the person arguing that Phil Hellmuth is only good against bad players, is Nuwwarah. Mo's been with Poker News, I think, as long as I have, or pretty close thereabouts. He is
I know, I'm letting her speak.
Most experienced writers, and he is extremely knowledgeable on poker, and actually he's already written on the subject of Phil Hellmuth not being good against good players. So welcome, Mo.
The next debate should be if my hair or your hair is better. You're making me miss my hair because I can't do stuff like that with it.
Yeah, the Rona and being home and not having to travel the circuit has definitely given me a little bit of extra freedom to hit it pretty hard and go crazy in the hair department. The person who has the side of the debate to argue that Phil Hellmuth is good against everyone, Jason Glatzer, formerly an American, now we think of him as a Lithuanian. Jason, also an extremely well-versed writer for Poker News, as well as several other poker sites. He's deeply embedded in the European and sort of Eastern European, I think, poker scene, and someone that I very much respect and appreciate taking the time. Welcome, Jason.
Love the hair as well, Sarah. I'm not going to even try to compete. I don't think I could even compete with Mo's hair either. I would lose any hair contest. But we're not debating hair, so maybe I have a chance in this debate. We'll see.
I was going to say, so whoever wins the debate, Sarah wins the craziest hair award. I'm actually shocked. I'm trying to get to all, see all the comments, and I'm shocked that like a million people haven't already said something like, what the hell is that crazy lady doing with her hair? All right, here we go. All right, now I can see all of the comments. I knew it was out. All right, so I say we get our clocks ready and just get right in, because I'm really excited about the portion of the show where we're going to open it up for you guys. I can see a lot of you guys already have opinions, have facts. And so if, Mo or Jason misses something that you think is super obvious, or you have a point that we maybe don't touch on, after their formal portion of the debate, you guys are willing to, or you guys are encouraged to, please jump in and, let us know what we're missing, obviously. Okay, I'm going to put 3 minutes on my clock. Let me make sure the old boss producer guy back in there is ready. Jesse, are you feeling ready for this? Okay. You're ready? All right, everyone is ready. And Mo, give us 3 minutes. Tell me why Phil Hellmuth is only good against bad players.
All right. First off, if I go past 3 minutes, just cut me off. I don't know how long this is going to take. I just have some notes up. So
I got you.
I'll start off by straddling the fence a little bit. That's probably not the best opening, but I'm going to say if we're talking about mixed game skills, I'll definitely say Phil Hellmuth has put together, some excellent runs recently. So, second place in 25K 8 game in Europe, third place in the 2500 8 game, and won his Raz bracelet. Non-Hold'em events, I'm not as familiar with where his skill level is, just because, we're working with such a smaller sample size there. But when it comes to No Limit Hold'em, like, he's given off some real obvious clues that, even though he says this is the game that has always come to him so easily, it's maybe not as easily nowadays as it used to, because I just think his technical skills maybe aren't where he thinks they are. Just basically the fact that he dismissed Daniel Negreanu's strategies against Doug Polk, I mean, that tells you kind of all you need to know right there. He hasn't embraced kind of the strategies that you need nowadays to win at the highest level. I mean, the way he plays, getting in people's heads, white magic and soul reads. I mean, they all did amazing things when, the fields were all Bob from the local bar firing, the 1500 that he plays once a year. And, I mean, they're probably still working fine in the 1500, the average 1500 at the WSOP. I'm sure he's still like a big favorite, but when it comes to like high level no limit strategy, I mean, it's kind of advanced leaps and bounds. It's not even close to how people used to think, although in some ways it's kind of circled back to how people used to think, I guess. But, the way he likes to play is kind of this survival based approach, small ball. I mean, when he told Doug Polk, like that huge hand they played in that cash game, he told Doug Polk, well, I could have the blockers. Polk was like, what are you talking about? And I think that's rightfully so, because when was the last time we saw Phil Hellmuth run like a huge multi-street bluff with blockers or future blockers, the way these top guys are running these huge multi-street bluffs now. And I just think it's reflective of kind of when he's shorthanded against the best players, survival is not good enough. You need to be coming after them. And, his high finishes, even in high buy-in events, are kind of like in the 4th through 10th range in recent years. And I think that shows something.
Ooh, perfect. My goodness. It's like Mo has a calendar in his head, a clock rather. Okay, awesome. I definitely think you made some points. I think there's room clearly, though, for this debate to rage on. Let's bring up Jason Glatzer over in Lithuania, who is going to be arguing for his opener, the idea that Phil Hellmuth is good against good players. Also, let's just tee up the clock again. And let's go.
Joey Ingram has called him one of the most underrated poker players of all time, except by himself, of course. Phil Galfond has described him a man who wins challenges. Of course, we're talking about none other than Phil Hellmuth Jr., who the debate is about, one of the most dominant poker players for now his fifth decade and counting. Among some in the poker community, there's this misconception that Hellmuth can only beat bad players, but he's proven it decade after decade that he can beat whoever comes in front of him. Of course, he's going to have his mishaps at times. I mean, you don't get to the poker resume that you've had with 24 million in live poker caches without coming across some good competition. And he's done it time and time again. And maybe the World Series of Poker is the best place to really exemplify that, where he has 15 million of his caches. Of course, he has a record-breaking 148 caches, another record of a 15 gold bracelet with 10 or 11 being the next closest, another 11 runner-up performances on top of that for another record. It gives a great timeline of why Hellmuth can beat the best throughout his history. And it all began back in '89 when he beat the best for his first bracelet, becoming the youngest WSOP main event champion at 24 years old, beating the 10-time gold bracelet winner, Johnny Chan, a red hot Johnny Chan, I might add, who was a back-to-back winner at the time. So certainly back then, Phil proved himself, and he had doubters even then. And then in the 90s, he went on, won 5 bracelets, silenced some doubters. Internet era, people coming on, people saying Hellmuth can't win anymore. What do you know, another 5 bracelets. And then you rage on, and last decade, he won 2 of his 4 bracelets in res. And I know this could go for the rebuttal, but it's going back to Mo's point that he is maybe perhaps underrated by everybody in mixed games. And some of the best players in the world come out to play these Raz events. It's not Joe Blow from the Firehouse coming out to play a Raz event. He's going to play a No Limit Hold'em event. And he really silenced the doubters in 2012 when he won the World Series of Poker Europe main event in France. There were some big names on that table. Jason Mercier was on that table, Phil Dodecci, basically becoming the first 2-time, the only main event winner in 2 different continents. That's not all, because he also has shown it in other formats like Heads Up Play. In 2005, he won the Heads Up Championship for $500,000, defeating Chris Ferguson in the final round. 8 years later, coming close to doing it again before losing to Mike Matusow. In 2017, he faced off first against Doug Polk. So we have that moment now where he looked silly against Doug, but he beat Doug in the King of the Hill on Poker Night in America. Then went on to beat Dan Cates. And Esfandiari, of course, which I can maybe get into later because I ran out of time.
Oh my goodness.
I thought I was speaking fast, but apparently not fast enough.
Don't worry, we have more time. There's more where that came from. And yeah, I remember some of those events. Even I may have been a little bit surprised. So many questions. I'm keeping track of your guys' questions, by the way. We're throwing them out there in the comments section right now. I'm really curious. I could only see Jason's face during that moment, but I'm wondering what Mo's face was doing during some of this conversation. So we're going to throw it back to my boy Mo, who's going to rebut some of the points which Jason made. Now, obviously, Mo conceded on the point of mixed games, but Jason did make quite a few points about his bracelets, some of his runs in some of these going deeper in some of these high stakes events. And I'm interested what you think about his battle with Doug Polk. So let me cue up the timeline. I'm going to give you 3 minutes, Mo, to combat Jason's points on Phil Hellmuth being great. And let's go now.
Yeah, I mean, he has had a lot of successes. He has done it time and again. There's no doubt about that. But most of those were pretty far in the past. is the only thing. One no limit bracelet since 2012, and that one came with a 30-minute level event, a turbo, a little more variance in that one. I'm not saying that was all luck. I didn't cover that event, so I don't know how well he played, but I think it says something that so many of his Hold'em bracelets were so far in the past. And then as far as, winning against, people in a heads up sit and go, I mean, nobody's really much of a favorite in a heads up sit and go. I know he's had a lot of successes, so I'm thinking maybe there is something to that. I'm not going to sit here and say there's not. He seems to have done well in these heads up sit and go formats. But you're talking about a format there where like an expert player is like 60-40 against, just a pretty good player who's just has never really practiced, but like knows how to play the game. It's not really a format where there's going to be much of an edge either way. And the bottom line is all of his wins being so far in the past it's just, it's evolution. Everything trends toward efficiency. Negreanu posted a tweet about this pretty recently. And yeah, you just have to realize the game's always getting tougher. And with the system trending towards efficiency and his results falling a little bit off in recent years, I don't think that's an accident. I'm not saying that Phil deserves to be on a lower bar than today's players who are better than him, because they have to be compared to their ecosystem, right? And when Phil was in his prime, and I don't want to make him sound like he's totally washed, because he's not. He can still compete, but when he was in his prime at the top and just better than everybody else, or almost everybody else, he was one of the best in the world, legitimately, for sure. And I don't know if, well, all these guys, there's a lot of guys who are better than him, but I don't know how close they are to the top. It's so, I think it's fair to call him, one of the best ever for sure, especially in tournaments. But nowadays, definitely wouldn't say he's on par with the top guys. That's just the way, that's just the natural order of things. I don't hold it against him. I don't think any less of him for it.
Are you giving up your last 5 seconds?
Gave up my last 5 seconds. I thought it was all right. I mean, I don't need to be,
You made some good
100%.
arguments.
No, I'm with you. Totally fair, and plenty of points. So, Jason, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. And I do think this is, of course, what Mo brings up. It's been echoed by Daniel Negreanu. And I think especially for Daniel, we've seen him, after the Super High Roller Bowl, say very publicly that he really needed to, after playing with these Germans, he really needed to look at his own game. He needed to get back in the books, if as it were, on his own game. And then after, having this heads up match with Doug Polk, he's been very clear that, Phil Hellmuth doesn't appear to have any desire to look at these solvers, to look at the GTO, to look at what some of the best names in the game now at this point are doing. And really what Daniel has said is that that's basically just A, disrespectful, and B, silly. So I'm curious what you would say about, that really amongst his peers at this point, that there needs to be some studying, or at least some acknowledgement of what they're doing. Let's just queue up our 3 minutes, and then after Jason gets this 3 minutes, we'll give Mo 1 more minute, and then I'm going to open it up to some debate amongst our watchers and viewers, and hear what they have to say. Are you guys ready? I guess I should say, are you ready, Jason? I'm ready. Here you go.
Look, my bar was set pretty low. Let's face it. The question was, does Phil Hellmuth just beat bad players? And I mean, he's maybe not studying GTO. We know that he's likely not studying GTO. And the question is he just beating bad players? Now you have your, let's say, 1%ers now. And I'm not sure he can beat the 1%ers and on a consistent basis without putting in a lot of time and effort. But that's not really, first of all, what his focus is in general. As a made poker player, he can find better games and entering a 25K full of the best poker players in the world, where even if he has an edge, it's going to be so small that he's better off just playing cash games on an app, or doing whatever he might be doing with his time. It's he's good enough to beat good players. Is he good enough to beat the best players? I would tend to side not without putting in a lot of time. Is he good perhaps to beat the best players in a limited environment where they're maybe having trouble adjusting to his style of play? I believe that's still the case. And he's had some good results in some of these big event buy-ins that he's bought into. I know it goes back quite a while, but back in 2012, the one drop for 2.6 million for sixth place in the high roller for one drop in 2015 for nearly 700,000, and he also did okay in the super high roller bowl in 2016. None of that's recent enough. The game of poker moves fast, so whether he would repeat those results now, I don't know, but he's consistently, when challenged, comes up and meets the challenge, just like Phil Galfond says. And I feel he's the type of person where if you challenge him, he's going to do the best to beat the challenge. And he may go about it differently than Daniel Negreanu, trying to fight fire with fire, as Hellmuth has said himself, and may try to, like he said, Daniel, you should fight fire with Daniel, not fire with fire. And that may work out for him, it may not. It's worked out with him over the years, especially in the live environment where he can get tells. At times, it's not worked out well at all, as Mo pointed out with a recent hand against Doug Polk. There have been some other embarrassing moments on high stakes poker over the years, but he's held his own more or less, even in cash games against good players in Poker Night in America in the past. And it really depends. I think if you put him in these heads-up battles where he's studied the game, he could beat the best in the game, or come close to being the best in the game. I really would have liked to have seen Doug Polk coming and facing Phil Hellmuth once again in a Phil Hellmuth type of challenge instead of on Doug Polk's arena where it's pure cash games. But we'll see how he does against Daniel. That'll be a good look at things going ahead.
Okay, 3 minutes done. So for the final conclusion, basically the way that they look at, and by they, I mean the powers that be in the debate world, they look at it as a disadvantage to be the person who starts the debate, because you basically start with only the information that you're coming to the debate with, where the person who gets to come in after, can sort of work in other arguments. So whomever starts the debate does get a short little snippet at the end, and we're going to give that to Mo now, just 1 minute before we open it up. I do think, and this could very well be my fault, I did struggle for a while with exactly what to call the debate. I mean, we know we're debating the relative skills of Phil Hellmuth, right? But how I was going to pose the question, I wasn't 100% sure. And I will say that from a semantics point, Jason did make a very good point. We're not saying, is Phil Hellmuth only good against medium players? I did say, is he only good against bad players? So that does, I will concede that maybe was a mistake on my part, and I'm sorry to you, Mo, if I messed it up. But let's load up 1 minute on the time clock and give Mo 1 minute to respond to some of Jason's final points, and also to just wrap up why those watching and listening should accept that Phil is only good if he's playing against bad or not the best players. Great. Are you ready, Jesse? You ready to go? All right, and start.
Yeah, I think, the fact that he has had some big results, but it had come in, 5 to 10 years ago, which is kind of, I think, shows, because that's kind of when the best players started to really get closer to mimicking the stronger solver outputs and the stronger strategies. And I think that says something. And, at the end of the day, nobody is playing perfect, and solver outputs are incredibly hard to mimic. They're incredibly complex. Nobody can mimic them except maybe Linus Love. So, the edges to be gained, though, just get smaller and smaller for him to play the way he does over the years. So eventually, he's just going to have less and less room to maneuver. And I think it's happening, and you can see it in his results. But, maybe I'll be wrong and he's ready to go on a run. We'll see, I guess.
All right. Well, I have several questions. I think you guys both made quite a few points, and I actually think that this has opened up some other questions, really, actually, that I also have, and some things that I think are worth talking about as a poker community. One of those that we're ultimately sort of talking about, right? Do you have to not just acknowledge, but sort of study and get to the point where, GTO is sort of a part of your game, or using solvers is something that you're integrating into your game? Is that necessary? And I think even I was actually just messaging with Bryn Kenny and talking to him. He's always said that, like, of course, it's really important to know what other people are doing, but also it's really important to stay true to your own game. And that for Bryn, for example, and I never know what they're saying to me. Is this really what they're doing? Is this really what's going on? Like, is Bryn at home, like, calculating all the things? Maybe. But I do think this opens up the larger sort of conversation, which has to do with if it's really realistic or possible at this point to be in the high stakes world without, I guess, moving in the direction of having to turn your study and that this like instinctual exploitative type of play. If we were going to look at the live circuit, do you guys, and I'll start with you first, Jason, do you feel like there is really not a way at this point to stay relevant in that world without shifting from this exploitative style?
It really depends on what Phil wants to do. I mean, if right now, for example, if Phil wants to go on just playing WSOP events, if it's anything like how, let's say, mid-stakes poker is here, lower mid-stakes buy-ins, live poker is in most of Europe, he'd be fine in those kind of events. He'd be fine in WSOP main events. But if he wants to be consistently battling it out in the 25Ks, the 100Ks, live, once you get beyond that, then you get a lot of businessmen. It's at least good, even if you're going to keep most of your base strategy the same, to understand what other people are doing, because so much of the field is doing it. It's very difficult as it is, and if he wants to migrate to that field, he's going to run into some difficulties, in my opinion. But he can still beat good players in these other tournaments as well, while picking his spots against the weaker players. It's picking his spots against good players and the weaker players. It really depends. And Phil knows how to use his image when he wants to as well. He knows that he can be labeled a nit at times, and then he'll pull off a bluff that you never expect. So it's not that Phil has just one gear and he's not a thinking player. I think he's fine in the realm that he's in now. He's never been in that realm where he's been in the super high roller balls. It's never been something that he's done, he's dabbled in it, but never taken it seriously. So it
That being
depends, is the
said,
answer.
he is going to, right? So he has and I'm actually curious if you guys think this bet is fully going to happen, right? But he has a bet with Daniel Negreanu to play actually, I can't remember the exact specifics, but it's a very high number of 25Ks that he needs to play, a significant number of 25Ks. And if he's profitable at all in these 25Ks, then he wins the bet. And Daniel is so certain that he will not, but obviously Phil is so certain that he will, that he's even willing to put up what I would assume is going to be in the millions of dollars for his buy-ins in these tournaments. I want to ask you, Mo, Jason brought up this point, and I think this would be the other side of the argument for, whether or not exploitative play is really even possible anymore. I can understand when Phil says, okay, why would you want to fight fire with fire, right? Like, he's like, I'm never going to be this like computer wizard, or, I'm never going to be this certain type of player. So why would I even like bother? Instead, I could just be myself and maybe still, be profitable even at these higher levels. what would you say to both Phil saying that and actually also just that concept for other maybe players who have either been around or for who don't feel interested in jumping into that particular part of high stakes study?
Well, first I would say, yeah, like I said, nobody is playing really all that close to perfect for the most part, especially in tournaments. So it's not like the biggest deal if you're not spending heaps of time, studying solver outputs. I do think you need to have some idea of some of the base concepts behind it, I guess. And once you kind of gain that, you can use your own poker knowledge like Phil does have and work off that. But you do need some idea, I think, of what's going on at that level. I don't think he needs to just like sit in his house for 6 months and then study solver outputs and then he's ready to tackle 25Ks after that. Especially when it comes down to this bet, like he's getting 2-1 on a 50 tournament sample. I mean, that's pretty good. Like you could random your way into a 50 tournament sample. That's not that many tournaments. Like hand histories, I've seen like hand histories from winning tournaments, it's like a few hundred hands. So 50 tournaments times a few hundred hands. I mean, you're talking about not many hands at all. So as long as he kind of gets some base idea, I think he's fine, honestly. Like, especially getting 2-1 on that side bet. I don't think it's the worst spot for him.
So I'm curious. Well, I guess that's like a neither here nor there. I'm curious what you think, Jason, about someone very specifically wanted to know if you believe in white magic.
If I believe in white magic, I believe that Phil has a feel for the game, and sometimes his feels kind of like Negreanu. When you watch Negreanu play, he can kind of talk his way into like what the other player has, and then he may or may not act on that information. So I feel Phil kind of does the same thing from time to time, and he knows how to get into poker players' heads, but it's usually going to be, the recreational players. Most of the serious players, professionals, are not going to let Phil get into their head. Some do, but most of them not. I mean, I believe to it from a marketing sense. He's certainly always presented himself well, and in terms of entrances and things like that. But I'm not quite sure how to better answer the question. White magic, what is it? What's the concept? I feel he has a good feel. Let's leave it at that. I like that people like Phil, though, use these terms and pump themselves up. It makes poker more sporty, kind of maybe sometimes like what Phil does makes it more look like WWE, like a wrestling kind of thing, ready to battle. But that's what poker is at the end of the day. It's a battle. It's nice to see that we don't have, the same traditions as other sports. And whether you want to consider poker a sport or a hobby, it is a competition. It's nice to see the white magic, or him coming in as an emperor, or whatever Phil wants to do. It's something to talk about, something to see.
I'm curious, Mo, and at this point we've moved away, I would say, from you guys having to have your specific stance that I gave you, and I'm just more at this point wanting to kind of open up the discussion. There are a few questions in here that I think we'll get to some larger concepts in poker that I'm just curious as to people who are in the game as much as you are, what your thoughts are. And I'm actually curious on a personal level, and I'll start with you, Mo, what you think about is Phil. Okay, so I'll say I just did an interview with Marley Cadero where she was saying that she thinks that a lot of Daniel Negreanu is like just a shtick, right? And I asked Daniel about that. Are you a shtick, or like, is this who you really are? And I think there's always a little bit of, some of both maybe. And I'm wondering, sometimes I wonder, because it's very clear that Phil is an intelligent person, I would assume. And I'm curious if you think that maybe part of what he does, and maybe when he says these sort of incendiary things or does kind of ridiculous things, do you think that he sometimes is playing the shtick of the, old player that doesn't know what's going on? Or do you think he really is so stubborn that he's also just like, no, I really don't give an F and I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing?
I think like 80% the latter. I think he embellishes it a little bit, But I really do think like his ego is that big in my experience. Like I've interviewed him a few times. I love Phil, for the record. He's awesome. Like I agree with Jason. He's really good for the game. Like he's really fun character and it's great. And I enjoyed my interviews with him, but it definitely it's definitely something you can feel when you talk to him. He genuinely does believe that like he's the man and he's gonna wreck these people that are he's playing against. And there's some truth to some of the things he says for sure. Like when he's telling people, well, let's see if you're around in 10 years and shit. I mean, a lot of people aren't. Like that's real, that happens quite a bit. So yeah, I think he mostly believes it, but I think he embellishes a little bit. And yeah, he's kind of embraced his like, I don't know, on Twitter, it's been fun. I went back through his tweets for a couple articles, and he's really like kind of embracing the underdog role at this point, which is like he hasn't talked hardly 1 ounce of trash to Negreanu. He's setting himself up good because he keeps like complimenting Negreanu. You're great, Daniel. You're doing great things, and I respect you a lot. And so he's kind of putting himself into a no lose situation here coming up, where he's built Negreanu up to his own followers. Hey, this guy's the man. He is one of the best. So if I lose to him, it's all good. And if I beat him, well,
The greatest.
I think we're gonna, yeah.
It's kind of what Negreanu had against Polk in a way. Like even though they were trash talking each other so much, but by the time like the competition was coming along, Negreanu was saying, "I'm playing in your arena where you're the best," blah blah blah, setting himself up in some ways, knowing that he wasn't favored to come out ahead in this outcome. But I think with Phil, it's a little bit different. I don't buy into these odds at all. I know Negreanu basically got a free $1 million lesson from Doug Polk, playing him heads up, and studied quite a lot. But in this format, and this is something Mo said earlier, in this format, I don't see that there's any huge favorite or huge underdog. And Phil somehow seems to come ahead a lot against really good opponents in these heads up formats. I don't put him as an underdog, and he's a 2.5 to 1 underdog. I would say you could flip a coin, and that's who the winner is going to be, and I wouldn't be surprised.
And even Daniel, I will say, did say this is such a ridiculous and small sample size. This is essentially just entertainment, and like you could tell basically nothing from this. And but also like I'm probably gonna win. Okay, so there's a few really interesting questions that I want to get into from our Twitter and our Instagram. But before we do, there's something that you guys have referenced a couple of times that maybe some of our audience might not be familiar with or might not really understand what those like implications are, right? Or what that could have what meant to this debate. So Mo, could you maybe talk a little bit about this hand that we're talking about with Doug Polk? I'm asking for the audience, obviously, because I know the whole hand history and everything that happened.
Okay, so what happened was it was on high stakes poker. I can't remember what the stakes or the straddle situation was, but it was like Hellmuth open middle position, button call, big blind Doug Polk call, Jack 9-8 rainbow. Hellmuth has Queen 10-0, so he has the nuts. Doug Polk has 10-7-0 second nuts. And it goes check to button bet, Polk raise. And then it was like bet 2K, raise to 76, shove for like 97 or something like that. And yeah, so what happened after that was the funny part was basically Hellmuth, I think he could like sense his chance of getting a call was maybe slipping. I don't know what. This was a bad live read by Hellmuth. He decided to try to like talk Polk into calling him, and he was like, well, I could have. And then Polk was like, what could you have? And then he was like, I could have the blockers, 2 10s. And then Polk was just like in complete disbelief. He was like, you're talking about blockers? I mean, I think that was fair. Like I said, I that was like legitimately something I do agree with when I was saying that. Like, when was the last time we seen Phil? Somebody should send one if there is. I'd like to see one because I can't think of one. I want to see Phil run a huge bluff with a good blocker hand. I don't recall ever seeing one. So I mean, yeah, I thought that was really funny though. It was really funny.
Commentating back in 2017, but it's not something that really, Kate should have really folded to. I don't really know how we describe that. And the check raise was a bluff, and then the river was so little. You know which hand I'm talking about with Dan Cates in their heads up match had Hellmuth down to the rail, and it was like a 10-10, 2-3 board, and Cates had 10-5 for basically trips, and Hellmuth had Jack Queen for nothing. And basically it was bet by Cates and then a raise by Hellmuth for almost his whole stack, like it was 20 to 30 he had left, and a call, and then it was like a 9 on the river, but it was 3 diamonds on the board and just a shove by Hellmuth, but the shove was like 1/5 of the pot, and somehow Cates folded, and then Hellmuth came back to win the match, so maybe there was some of that in Hellmuth's head, that maybe Cates remembers this because how many, and maybe Polk remembers this because how often are they in contact? Otherwise, I think that the mistake is how often is really Phil Hellmuth ever bluffing in that spot? Like, never mind the table talk. It's like, if it's one thing if Tom Dwan does that, okay, Tom Dwan has air or has a draw or has blockers. Dwan can even say he has blockers and have blockers. It's a move that Tom Dwan would more frequently make than a Phil Hellmuth, and it just seems like that was the mistake more than the table talk. I think no matter what talk was happening, even though it was second nuts, and even though looking back in real time, it's not like a fold I can typically make with second nuts. Maybe for that kind of cash movement against that kind of player you can, but it was basically the circumstances that the shove was pretty bad in that spot more than the table talk.
And it's interesting because I think so often when people make like hero calls or hero folds, right, all of the glory goes to that person, which, they deserve. But does it also throw some shade on the person who tries to make that kind of a play, or who, I would say you're right in that I think Phil Hellmuth is everyone has a polarized range in that spot, but if your range is almost always leaning towards nitty, then that makes it a lot, I guess, easier. Because I remember watching this hand and thinking like, wow, Doug Polk is just amazing. But when I really start thinking a little bit deeper on it, it's like, okay, I can kind of see how it's like, what is he making this with? Maybe
if Hellmuth has something like a set, he's calling. If he has a draw, he's calling. He's raising some speculative hands with draws, but he's never jamming those, but he's calling a lot of his drawers as well. So what is he shoving with? Either nothing, which makes no sense because the pot is so little, or he has the goods and just trying to get value then and there, and maybe running it twice against a set so he doesn't lose a massive pot, with the nuts on the flop. I don't know. I'd be curious more to know what Hellmuth's thinking was rather than Polk's. Polk's thinking seems fairly logical, knowing Hellmuth's history. Hellmuth is capable of a bluff there, but how often with those circumstances? Almost 0 to none. It's and maybe it's hindsight talking, and in real time I've faced those hands where I've thought for a second, should I fold here? And then I've called, and cash games usually involves maybe having 1 or 2 too many 2 beers at that point in time, but it's very hard. But I'm not on the level of a Phil Hellmuth, obviously. So it's like, or on a level of a Doug Polk, who should be thinking on those levels. How often would he be doing that? And he really should never be shoving for that large of a stack with the stone cold nuts on the flop.
So let me ask you guys this. I think this is, and we'll maybe just take a couple more of these like comments/questions and wrap it up. We will, for those who are watching, whether on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch, we will put this embedded into the site, of course, so you can rewatch it, post things, throw it out there to your friends and homies. But I think there's this particular conversation lends itself to a few other interesting conversations. And Barney Boatman, who's someone who's been in the poker world, obviously, for a long time, who I think is fantastic, who has a great Twitter. He has a great sense of just sarcasm and wit in general. But he makes an interesting point here. And Jason, I would like you to start by commenting your thoughts on this. He says, I've been eking out a living for decades out of the bogus dichotomy between good and bad players.
Wow. Okay.
Do you think that this is a bogus dichotomy?
I mean, I'm not sure I quite understand that, but I know a lot of cash game players that make a living by searching out the best games. It's like anything else. If you're facing players that are better than you on average, you should expect to lose. And if you're facing players that are worse than you on average over time, you should win, So I'm not sure if that's answering the question, but bad players can be winners and good players can be losers if they're not doing proper game selection, bankroll management, and other things that have nothing to do with the debate at hand, but do have to do with being a profitable poker player. It's just as much about that than it is about everything else, whether it's online and hopefully soon here in Europe live again. I'm so jealous of you guys, by the way. I'm so jealous. Yeah, I see these festivals in Florida, Mo traveling around to Vegas, Texas,
Jason, we haven't had online poker in like more than a decade, so just don't cry anymore over
but now you're going to be getting that too. You're getting everything. The Wire Act is no more. We're going to see some big action soon.
We really hope. We're really hoping over here. Mo, what would you say? Do you think it's a bogus dichotomy, and or that this is something that people are missing, and that there's plenty of money to go around, and this idea that there's mostly just good and bad players?
Yeah, I think what Jason said might be part of it about game selection. That would make some sense. I'm not sure what else he would mean, except maybe that he's playing with both good and bad players, and maybe he sees himself in the middle, but he's like, I'm fine because the good players still make enough mistakes that I can win against sometimes. And then the bad players are, like Jason said, he's going to win long term no matter what against them. So he still sees himself as being fine. And maybe another thing that he's saying is they're not as far apart as a lot of people think. I guess that would maybe be what he means by bogus dichotomy. And like I said, maybe he's just referring to like good players make mistakes too. So, he's living off those every now and then.
This is a really interesting question, and one that I wanted to make sure we got to before we left. So bear with me for a second. It's from P Thorpe 91. I think it's from our Instagram. I mean, yes. So he's answering the question, is Phil Hellmuth only good against bad players? I mean, yes, but he's made it into an art form. Everyone seems so bothered about comparing themselves against the best. Whatever happened to just beating the rest? I'd argue that navigating an 1,000+ player field as consistently as he has to be better than the same could be better than just beating the same 40 people, tearing lumps out of each other, farming all the businessmen's money. How is that an achievement? And I will say there's been, in my time in the industry, I've had plenty of conversations with plenty of players and media alike about this sort of, and pardon the expression, but, incestuous world in the high stakes realm, where a lot of these players are not, a lot of these players have pieces of each other. Most of these players have pretty significant pieces of each other. And I think we can all agree. I actually don't really think that necessarily changes a lot of the game, but that in some ways they're all just like exchanging certain amounts of money back and forth. And then like one guy wins one time and one guy another. And that in some ways, since they all, a lot of them, prescribe to the same schools of thought in terms of how they're playing or what's trending, what thing happens to be happening in high stakes at that point, does that actually make them the best, or it just makes them really skilled at this one particular type of player with this, or type of play with this one small niche of players, versus having to play against a ton of players who are going to have completely wild and erratic styles that you're probably not going to be able to tap into right away. I'm curious what your thoughts are, Mo, to start.
I think sometimes people like that maybe have a misconception. If you would say that, I guess maybe you have a misconception of what like GTO play is, which is it's going to win no matter what the opponent's strategy is. But will these people win more or less than Phil in a WSOP 1K? I don't know. They're going to win. Like, I think suggesting that comment is kind of making it sound like you don't know if they're going to win as much as Phil. And I don't know for sure if they will or not. I would guess they would, because at the end of the day, they're just playing a stronger strategy. maybe Phil is going to be able to make better adjustments than them. It's possible, but we wouldn't know unless they played the same events on some large sample. That'll never happen because, the dirty secret of poker is that the long run is like impossible to make live, right? So you're never going to know for sure. And yeah, I would say if you question that, you're just not understanding what the high level strategy is, I guess. And yeah, these players are definitely going to win in a 1K and a 1500, and they're going to win big. I've heard people say like Fedor Holtz could be selling at 3x markup for the WSOP main. I remember people talking about that a few years ago, back when he made his really deep run. I think 2015, whatever, he got like 25th or something like that. I mean, if people think that, then these highest stakes guys must have an absolutely massive edge in these fields as well.
You could see with someone like Dominic Nietzsche, for example, who has 4 bracelets, of which I think at least 3 are in these massive, field events, that clearly there is some evidence to indicate that, on any given timeline, even
he won the Unibet Open online last week as well. So he won an 8-8 event at the end of last year. He's still doing it in these events. I mean, I know the Unibet Open's a 1K buy-in, but he's entering still value 200 events. A lot of these guys are, you see them, let's say on GG Poker playing in these huge 5-figure buy-in events, but you'll also see them in the 500s and the 1Ks. And it's much like, let's say, like other sports where you have your Premier League, like in basketball here, we have, the European League and we have the Lithuanian League, and the best teams are competing in the European League, and European football or soccer, you have the Champions League where the best teams come together. And very often, you can almost view a high roller such as that these guys certainly can beat the other tournaments. Now it's a matter of whether they can beat each other. And maybe there's a businessman or two and some value somewhere, but very often you look at the fields and there's not like a soft spot anywhere to be found, in these events. It's kind of hard to say that these guys couldn't beat the lower stakes or couldn't adjust to, players with different strategies. I think that the other players would have a hard time, they'd be completely exploited by, these top pros.
So I wanted this to go about 1 hour. So we are almost there. And there's a couple other comments that I still really want to get to, but I think this is an interesting. So Hamid Fashandi just said he's a horrible cash game player. And I think this is something interesting because Mo basically just touched on the dirty secret of poker. And we're talking about, say, for example, especially live tournament poker. I think this is where a lot of the poker audience gets their joy. And it's like, this is our Super Bowls. Like, these are our big moments where people, win big. And Phil is clearly very good at that and has done quite a lot of that. That being said, the bread and butter of almost every poker player is cash games. And I think most people would argue that the most difficult, and that it's a much more difficult game, cash games, because, right, you're always going to be able to play deep stacked should you want to. And deep stack poker clearly takes a lot more meta strategy. I'm trying to say these like really like things that everyone understands, but in ways that are not offensive or that no one's going to freak out about. Anyways, I don't know that much about Phil's cash game life, but maybe that's a big part of why some of these high stakes filmed matches show some of these, maybe leaks or something like that. Do you guys, is his bread and butter live tournament poker?
First, I want to give a shout out to Hamid. I went to school with him growing up, so a shout out to Paramus High School and all that. And nice that he tuned in. But yeah, I'll let Mo. I just wanted to give a shout out to Hamid, and I'll let Mo take this one.
Okay.
I would like to maybe go back and watch like his play on like Live at the Bike or something, because I know he played some live cash games. I think all I've ever seen from him cash wise is just stuff that's we've all seen on high stakes poker, which is, again, very small sample, and also playing against super tough players, which is kind of something Jason referenced earlier when he was talking about game selection. I don't know that Phil would necessarily play these games if they weren't televised. They're good for his brand, obviously. So yeah, I don't know that I can definitely say if he's good or bad in cash. I would say that hand where he just shoved Queen 10, it's not good. Like Jason said, it's not good. Like, it's just not something where you can really see many bluffs, I guess. So I guess that kind of indicates to me that maybe he's not playing as well as he should when he's 150 blinds deep or whatever. But again, maybe he's got good mixed game cash games that he plays in, though. I mean, like, there's big, 200, 400 type games around town. There's stuff that runs pretty regularly that I would guess if he wanted to, he would play in these, but I've never really seen him playing them or heard of him playing them. So I think it's like you said, Sarah, I think he just really enjoys tournaments. Lots of players do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I would guess, like I said earlier, I would guess if Phil wanted to make more money playing cash, I think he would do fine in a lot of mixed formats, and he could. I just think he just probably really prefers to spend his energy and time and money on tournaments.
And I do think you're right, because I kind of remember there was just recently this drama that had to do with like Mike Matisow and Scott Ball from Twitch. And Mike, when I was watching him explaining it, he was talking about this game that Phil and he had brought a lot of people to, and that it was clearly a mixed game, cash game, kind of underground thing. So I do think you're probably right. If there is a bread and butter, it's not his bread and butter, I don't think. But if there is like a little hustle out there, that it's probably in the world of mixed games. Okay, I'm gonna do just one more point, which Sean Ikes, I'm gonna go with Ikes, said. I've been watching Phil for 2 decades. His style of play has become predictable. Not that he's lost his edge, but players know what to expect from him now. Jason, what would you say to that?
You were breaking up during that. Can you repeat the question? At least
I heard
on my end.
Just fine.
Okay.
Okay. I've been watching Phil for 2 decades. His style of play has become predictable. Not that he's lost his edge necessarily, but players know what to expect from him now.
I mean, I guess in some cases that could be true. People studying Phil's game, they'll see that that he plays a very tight styled game, but we just see what's been televised as well. And you would really have to kind of study him to really gain an edge on his speech talk, on, getting in your head a little bit. I don't know. If I'm playing a tournament, I don't want Phil at my table. It's I feel like he would take me off my game, because I like to talk as well, but it's like he would want to be controlling the conversation, and it would make things a bit difficult. I'm not sure that you can really say he's predictable, because I think the way he would react against a certain player will be different with how he'll react against another player. But there's something to be said for it. I think for sure you can find some tendencies in his play that have remained consistent for 3 decades. It's certainly the case.
Mo, what would you say?
I think there is probably some truth to that. But, like Jason brought up when he was talking about that hand against Cates when they played, he is aware that people perceive him as very tight. So he will find a few spots to go for some moves. I mean, I remember there was a high profile hand a couple of years ago where he got picked off by Midwest tournament star Ku Vang, I believe it was. I have to go back and look at the hand. But yeah, he did get picked off on a pretty large bluff. It was on the televised WSOP main event streaming table. And yeah, like, he's not, I guess he is predictable, but he knows that. So he knows that there's times he needs to deviate from what people have seen, and he will deviate. And like I said, it doesn't always work, but it's good that he does, and it's good that he's aware of that. And I think we're kind of getting to the point now in poker where most people are aware of their image for the most part. And you know, I saw a guy in the 1K I covered this weekend, just playing the tightest player I've seen make the final table in like ever. He was playing so tight. I even went to dinner with this guy who had busted out. He was like, that guy was tight as shit. And I was like, yeah, definitely. And then randomly, final table, he just go like flop queen X. There's like bet call. He like raises. They both fold. He just turns over like king 10-0 or something. I didn't really see the hand. So like, I think, you know, tight players know that they're perceived to be very tight, and they'll find some spots. And I think Phil does.
That was tight as shit. Yeah.
That's what he said. He was like, that guy was tight as shit, huh? I was like, absolutely. I was like, I haven't seen that guy play hardly any hand. Every time he showed down a hand, he had ace king or something. So
oh my gosh.
then
we need to
I've
check
been
with our producer whether that's NC-17. We never got the NC-17 clarified. So I'm not
I don't
sure.
know what NC-17 looks like. I've been long past that, like a long time ago. But it's funny because I've been to so many, you know, dinners during poker tournaments where you're just surrounded by a bunch of other people who are, of course, playing the tournaments and just listening to these exact conversations. And, you know, regardless of where we've come to at the end of the debate, and I'm curious, we'll have to ask our audience and our people to weigh in, you know, were they swayed on either side? Do they still feel the way they did coming into this debate, and what is that? But I do think this is, in all the conversations we've had about poker, no matter what, we know Phil is good for poker. He's good for, it's sort of what Jason said. He's very much somebody who pays attention to the entertainment side of things. And, you know, some of my best hitting videos are times when Phil has just been completely losing his mind and everyone's like, oh my gosh, he's such a jerk or whatever. You know, it's just, he's polarizing in a lot of ways, but that makes for good and interesting. It keeps the poker world interesting and spicy. So Phil, we appreciate you regardless. And I really appreciate everybody tuning in to this debate. I appreciate both Jason and Mo so much for preparing for this and for agreeing to do this. And I think there are a lot of things in poker where there's easily a debate to be made on both sides, and that we should start creating this space where we can have these debates openly. We can invite people in. Mo and I were talking about maybe there has been this big debate recently, you know, regarding how we're going to be seating tables. Should we take 8 players and turn them into 2 4-handed tables?
Let's have that one.
That would be interesting. And I've seen even Matt Savage recently has been posting a few different questions, but we really, as a poker community, I think, you know, we operate primarily on logic, and that's the whole backbone of the debating space. So I would like to see some more of these. If you guys have ideas for things you'd like to see debated, or, you know, opinions, ways you'd like to see this shifted, of course, please get at us at PokerNews, at Auntie Chardonnay. Let me know what you guys want to see, and we will do our best to get it to you. And we'll just keep these 2 brilliant minds in the poker game on their toes with all of our work. Thank you guys so much for watching, for joining, for debating. We're sorry,
and thank
Phil.
you, Sarah. This was fun.
Yes. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Deuces.
Later.
Also, thank you to Jesse behind the screens, behind the scenes.